InfoBiz. We are at GeoSmart India 2016 and we have with us Dr. Kshemendra Paul. He is the program manager of information sharing department of the US government. Professor Paul, thank you and welcome to the
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm really pleased to be here at GeoSmart.
How important do you think information sharing is?
Information sharing is essential. My office is part of the US government's response to the tragic events of 9/11. Recognition that different government agencies could better collaborate and cooperate through sharing information, not only at the federal level, but with state and local agencies, with our partners in the private sector, and more broadly internationally. We take a standards and architecture approach to information sharing and safeguarding, worrying about the security of the information, the privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties of people who may be represented in the information. But open government's essential, and you mentioned open governance. Kind of critical to progress we've made is an inclusive open governance process, bringing different stakeholders together so that they can agree on approaches, standards to improve information sharing and safeguarding.
Is open data essential for data sharing?
It is. We have an interesting model though as we think about open data. So, imagine a continuum, right? Sometimes information is created, collected, processed. It may have degrees of sensitivity, there may be privacy issues implicated. We look at those upstream kind of issues as the place where information sharing has to happen first, and the standards development has to happen there, right? Now, as that information can be aggregated, as it can be statistically summarized, it becomes easier to imagine how it could get released out into the public domain through open data solutions. So, key idea though is that continuum, when security and privacy issues are implicated, or when the data is in some form put out onto the open web and in an open data kind of context, you want to be able to have consistent standards, right, and consistent governance for that process.
But does open data mean free data?
Not always, not always. Many government data sets, right, in the US government has a policy about open data first and, setting the defaults to put data into the public domain as quickly and effectively and efficiently as possible. But that doesn't extend necessarily more broadly. There's always a role for industry, other providers, other governments make their own choice about what they are going to do with data that they collect. But in the US, yeah, the policy is open data first.
So therefore, you can have free data, but if value is added to it, then it may get priced.
That's right, the data is out and the idea is to spark innovation. I'll give you some examples. In the US, two examples where open data have sparked whole industries. One is around geolocation, right, which has sparked a whole mapping and location-based services industry. Other is weather, right? By some accounts, the weather is a $30–40 billion industry in the US, bigger globally. The raw underlying data is put out into the public domain. Lots of different players though add value to the data, aggregate it with other data sets, disseminate it, provide it in a context that's solution-oriented for consumers and other industries, and so that's all totally legitimate, right? That's a key part of why the US government has adopted an open data policy, is to spark innovation and set data free, unlock data, democratize data.
Do we consider the citizens also as a part of the data source?
Absolutely. My domain is more national security, public safety, but let me give you an example in the US from my domain. One of the key advances, one of the key successes we've had in the national security, public safety space is something called the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative. Sometimes better known by its public awareness component, see something, say something. So the key innovation here is, police officers in their community see something suspicious and take action to protect their communities. What we've done is standardize that process, defining 16 behaviors, it's behavior-based, reasonably indicative of pre-operational criminal planning or terrorism-related activity. Critical to making this work is community involvement, right? Imagine citizens with smartphones taking pictures, videos, reporting to the local police, right? You want them to take action to protect their communities. Neighborhood watch for the nation. But you also then need to build in safeguards for privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties, right? And we have that within these systems to make sure that constitutionally protected activity remains protected and doesn't become implicated in these sort of systems. Critical to maintaining confidence of the community and accountability with public safety and national security entities.
So do you consider social media also as a data source?
We do. There's a lot of open source, meaning it's social media, a lot of examples where in the US folks are putting geofences around events, for example, and looking not only for untoward activity or threats, but also opportunities to support individuals in distress. And this relates to a big push in the US around next generation 911, right? IP-based, internet protocol-based services. Everybody uses cell phones these days, but our traditional 911 emergency response system is tied to landlines. We've made accommodations, but there's a big push to have this next generation, a natively internet protocol-based approach, right? Which potentially could involve somebody using social media to make a 911 call, right? That kind of thing.
If we look at open data, one of the things that results from open data is a more open government or a governance, right? But then there are, at least I have seen in my experience, that very often that kind of openness is not welcomed. People want to have a certain amount of secrecy about the data for various reasons, whatever it may be. So how do you strike a balance?
Well, that's a key driver. President Obama, when he came into office in 2009, his first day of office signed out an open government memorandum. It was electrifying for many of us in public service. Talked about government being transparent, government being participatory, and government being collaborative. Open government is sunshine is the disinfectant, right? And critically important, I think, to improve governance, to improve confidence in government is open government.
You're mentioning 9/11 several times, and that was definitely a kind of watershed event for the US. But it is, at the same time, it's very interesting that that didn't result in the government closing up. What you're saying is that resulted in the government opening out even further.
Yes.
And that's something very interesting.
It is very interesting, and it goes to the our constitutional system in the U.S., our open democracy, our open society, very much emphasizes local control, separation of powers between the federal government and the states. And the domain I am most active in is this nexus between national security and public safety. And in that space, you can't operate by fiat. There's a lot of constitutional protections for civil rights, civil liberties, privacy, and the federal government can't dictate to the state and locals. And the federal government's not willing to write unlimited check, right? So it really has to come to a collaborative approach where everybody can participate under their own steam, with their own funds, which kind of takes you in this direction of distributed and decentralized yet coordinated. And a big driver here is that state and local, most of the law enforcement organizations in the U.S. are state and local. The federal law enforcement is elite, has a leadership role on national security type cases, but really depends on that partnership. State and local law enforcement, they can't do terrorism one way and the rest of their business another. They need to operationalize, they need to train the frontline officers, right? So that's why I think those things kind of led to it being, kind of continue to be open and emphasizing these privacy, civil rights, civil liberties considerations. Critical to maintaining community buy-in.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So what we can conclude is you need open data so that you can innovate, and one part of that innovation is an open governance where the citizen knows what the government is doing, and vice versa. So thank you, Dr. Kshemendra Pal, for the wonderful conversation.
And thank you for having me here in India for GeoSmart and Geointelligence.
Our pleasure.